Just because admin work is associated with what you're doing doesn't mean what you're doing is not clinical. The OldPremeds podcast, session number 300. Welcome to the OldPremeds podcast. My name is Dr. Ryan Gray, your host here, where I take questions directly from the non-traditional pre-med form over at premedforums.com. Go check it out. Sign up for a free account if you don't already, and ask your questions there. Before we jump into today's question, I want to talk about the MCAT Minute brought to you by Blueprint MCAT. If you are getting ready to take the MCAT, one of the biggest mistakes that you can make is not doing practice exams. I recorded an episode of Application Renovation today, and a student went from a 498 to a 500 to a 499 to a 511. And the biggest difference in his score was the fact that he did full-length exams. He did Q banks. All of those things you can get from Blueprint MCAT at blueprintmcat.com. Don't just settle with content review. Get the practice you need doing questions with a QBank, with full-length exams, blueprintmcat.com. So let's go ahead and jump into our question today. Our student says, I'm a non-trad student looking to apply in May of 2022 to start medical school in the fall of 2023, with questions about next steps regarding MCAT, clinical experience, and applying. Questions at the very end. So a little bit about me. I'm a 26-year-old East Coaster living in California working in clinical research. Previously did not do well in undergrad family health-related issues, which I will discuss on apps, and did a GPA enhancer post-bac program. In between, spent time living abroad in Argentina. I'm bilingual in Spanish and English, where my family is originally from. GPA, large state school undergraduate GPA, 3.129. Post-bac, GPA, UPenn, 3.69. Awesome. My big question would be, how many credits is that post-bac? LORs, 2 to 3 from dermatologists, 1 to 2 from academic UPenn. Again, be careful with LORs. Make sure you are meeting the minimum requirements necessary for each school that you are applying to. The fact that you did a postbac means you have access to professors and you may need more letters. Clinical experience, medical assistant in private dermatology clinic for 2 years, peer mentor at adolescent substance abuse program for 6 months. Research, studied learning and memory in fruit flies at UBA Med School in Argentina for 6 months. I lived in Argentina for 2 years as part of my gap years. What is it with fruit flies, really? Non-health experience. Worked in sales at a software tech company in Argentina. Currently, I'm working at UCSD Cancer Center as a full-time clinical research coordinator for 3 months. MCAT, currently studying for the MCAT to take in May of 2022, but difficult to study effectively with a full-time job. I got some recent feedback from someone who used to be on an admissions committee that my clinical experiences so far aren't compelling enough, i.e. medical assisting, which surprised me. They mentioned that the clinical research coordinator position that I'm working at currently will be viewed as administrative, even though I do interact with patients. They advised that I find a different, more clinical job. Also, since getting into the UC med schools is unlikely, even working at a UC school, they said it's not worth continuing to work there at the expense of MCAT studying. Separately, the clinical research coordinator job is highly demanding, and working full-time has made studying for the MCAT quite difficult. So I'm not opposed to finding a new job, ideally part-time, until I take the MCAT in May of 2022. My questions: what clinical jobs would make my story more compelling? I'm leaning toward taking a few months off to study for the MCAT. If I can swing this, would you advise for or against? And what gaps in my experience, potential application do you see? Any general advice? So, what clinical jobs would make my story more compelling? None. I loathe feedback that says, you're not compelling enough. What do you want me to do? Do you want me to cure cancer, right? That's always my go-to joke. You want me to cure cancer? Great. You know what? I've been meaning to. You know what? I dreamt about the solution to the problem like 2 months ago, but you know what? I put it off to the side because I thought what I was doing was compelling enough. But thank you for telling me I'm not compelling enough. I'll go cure cancer now. What do these people expect students to do, to be? There's only so many things you can do out there on top of everything else you're already doing. Just stop it already with this feedback. It's not compelling enough. You're not unique enough. Stop it. Ignore that person's feedback. That's what I'll tell you to do. What does it mean, compelling? Oh my gosh, you're a scribe. Everyone's a scribe. That's not compelling enough. Oh my gosh, you're an EMT. Oh, that's like so 1990. It's not compelling anymore. You're not like a Mars EMT. Why haven't you gone to Mars yet to be an EMT? Just stop it. I'm leaning towards taking a few months off to study for the MCAT. If I can swing this, would you advise for or against? MCAT's important. The MCAT's hard. And it's, never mind. Yeah, take a couple months off. If that's what you think you need, do it. That's fine. What gaps in my experience, potential application do you see? I don't know. I don't have it all on a timeline, but you got some good stuff. Looks okay. I don't know. That's too hard of a question to ask unless it's all laid out and I can put it all together as we're doing this. Any general advice? Yeah. Don't listen to people who are like, "Oh, it's not compelling enough." Your story, who you are as a person, isn't good enough. I want to dig into the clinical research coordinator can be seen as admin. This one person who has some potential experience as an admissions person, apparently at a medical school, maybe their medical school were like, oh, clinical research coordinators, yeah, it's not very clinical. I'll tell you, I've interacted personally because of family situations. I've interacted with several clinical research coordinators. It's clinical experience. They're asking questions. They're in there. They're doing stuff. There's a lot of admin work. Guess what? Most medicine is admin work. The far majority of a physician's time, of a resident's time, is admin work. Just because admin work is associated with what you're doing doesn't mean what you're doing is not clinical. So, clinical research coordinator, I would count that as clinical experience and understand that there are 200 plus medical schools in this country. Not everyone will go, oh yeah, we love clinical research coordinators. That's okay. You can't do anything about that. So you're working as a medical assistant now. That's great experience. Take a couple months off, see if you can kind of like maybe go per diem, take the MCAT, and then get back to it. Then you don't even really have any gaps on your application. You just took a couple months off to study for the MCAT. That's okay. Do that. Do you have any potential volunteer experience, right? The typical volunteer community service type stuff. Maybe that could be a gap in your application. Other than that, grades, MCAT score, clinical experience, shadowing. Make sure you get that shadowing in there. Do well in the MCAT. Turn in your application early. Tell a good story. Stories matter. I recorded an episode of Application Renovation today, Season 4, Episode 11. Will come out a few weeks after this specific episode is coming out. Student with a 4.0, 528. 4.0, 528. Literally, 100%. 4.0, 528. One interview. No acceptances. The rest of your application matters. Stats matter. The rest of your application matters as well. So, looks like you're doing everything okay. Ignore people who are like, well, it's not compelling enough. Just ignore it. Okay? I wish you the best of luck. We'll see you next time here on the Old Premeds podcast. Don't forget to check out blueprintmcat.com.